She screamed, then voice trembling just enough, making sure it carried down the hall. "Ethel! Margot! Help! Mark's hurt bad! Hurry!"
Riley Adams and Avery Adams were identical twins, two peas in a pod, but their personalities were as different as night and day. Riley was strong-willed and fierce, always throwing herself into protecting her sister from the time they were little. Avery, on the other hand, was gentle, fragile, and the quiet type who silently endured everything. The year they turned 18, the first tragedy struck. Avery was dating a no-good boyfriend who would often grab her arm and shout at her right in the middle of the schoolyard. Riley couldn't stand it. One day when Avery was pushed to the ground on their own front porch, Riley snapped. She grabbed a wooden stick and hit him over and over until the neighbors finally rushed over to pull her away. That beating left the boy seriously injured and sent Riley's life veering onto a completely different path. The doctors diagnosed Riley with an impulse control disorder. The court ordered her to be placed in a psychiatric treatment center more than 15 miles outside of town. The day Riley was taken away, Avery held her tight in front of the hospital transport van, crying and saying over and over, "I'm so sorry, this is all my fault." Riley just smiled, placing a hand on Avery's shoulder. "No, I did it for you. I always will." 10 years later, Avery was no longer a teenage girl. She had married Mark Collins, a man who appeared polished and gentlemanly on the outside, but hid a gambling addiction and a quick temper. Avery lived in the Collins family's old wooden house, under the same roof as her overbearing mother-in-law Ethel, and Margot, her sister-in-law, who took every opportunity to scrutinize and belittle her. Avery did all the housework, mopping floors, cooking meals, caring for her ailing mother-in-law, yet she never received a single kind word in return. Every day, Avery tried to hide the fresh bruises on her arms and back, hiding her fear, too, so that Gracie, her precious 4-year-old daughter, wouldn't see. But Gracie was the one who suffered the most. The little girl was often left unfed, scolded for eating everything and still not growing. Even worse, Noah, Margot's 7-year-old son, would regularly push and hit Gracie right there in the living room. And strangely, all the adults in the house simply looked the other way. One bitterly cold afternoon, Avery wrapped herself in a thin coat, cradled Gracie in her arms, and walked nearly 3 miles to the treatment center where Riley now lived. Avery's face was pale, her lips chapped, and a long, dark bruise was clearly visible on her arm. Riley saw her from the hallway window and shot to her feet, her heart feeling as though it were being squeezed. Inside the visiting room, Avery placed Gracie on a chair and sat down across from Riley. There was no point hiding anything now. She was trembling violently. "Riley, I can't take it anymore. Mark, his mother, Margot, they don't just hit me, they hit Gracie too. They want me to sign papers so they can take her from me. Riley, if I lose Gracie, I don't think I can go on." Riley stood up, her hands clenched into fists, and that look, the same look Avery had seen when Riley defended her all those years ago, flashed in her eyes once again. Avery tried to muster a weak smile. "I just needed someone to hold me for a minute." Riley stepped forward and wrapped Avery in a tight embrace, pulling her close as if she could shield her from the whole world. And then Avery spoke the words that made Riley's blood run cold. "Sometimes I think if I just disappeared, at least she'd be safe." At that moment, a firm, unshakable decision was made. "Avery, let me handle this. I'll get you out of there. I promise." And that was the beginning of a daring plan, a plan that would alter both their destinies forever.
Riley stood up, took off her gray hospital jacket, and draped it over Avery's shoulders. The two sisters were identical, so alike that when they swapped clothes and hairstyles, the entire world couldn't tell them apart. Avery trembled. "Riley, what if they find out?" Riley placed a finger on her sister's lips. "You just rest. Let me walk out there for you." This time, I won't let anyone hurt you or your little girl." Avery put on the hospital clothes, while Riley slipped into her sister's thin sweater and worn-out jeans. They looked at each other in the mirror, two identical figures, but one gaze was filled with fear, the other blazing with resolve. When the hospital staff entered, Avery choked back a sob, then lowered her head the way Riley always did. No one noticed anything unusual. Riley took a deep, deliberate breath as she stepped through the main doors, her first breath of freedom in 10 years after being locked away behind cold white walls. She didn't linger. Her mind held just one thought. Avery and Gracie were trapped in a living hell. On her way to Avery's home, Riley's heart began to pound, not from nerves, but from a flood of rage rising within her. The Collins family's wooden house came into view, old with peeling paint, the front yard littered with empty cans and scattered trash bags. Riley walked up the porch steps, and a musty, fetid odor wafted from inside, almost making her gag. The door opened.
In the dark, dingy kitchen, Riley witnessed the first sight that sent a jolt through her entire body. Gracie, 4 years old, was crawling under the table, picking up cookie crumbs from the floor and putting them into her mouth. No one was watching. No one even called her name. Riley dropped to her knees immediately, gently scooping Gracie up. The little girl flinched, terrified, her small hands flying up to shield her head, a reflexive gesture born from too many beatings. Riley felt her throat tighten, a fury so profound it made her whole body tremble. From the living room, the flap-flap of slippers shuffled closer. Ethel Collins appeared first, hands on her hips. "Just got back and you're already pulling that long face? Mop the floor. And don't forget the trash can. It's been stinking up the place for a week." Margot descended the stairs sneering. "Avery, what are you doing letting that kid crawl under the table? Can't you teach her anything? Pathetic as usual." Noah ran past, roughly shoving Gracie's shoulder. "Move, crumb snatcher." Gracie shrank deeper into Riley's arms, shaking uncontrollably. Riley remained silent. She observed each of them, their attitudes, like a wolf quietly entering the enemy's den. No one in the house realized Riley wasn't Avery. No one sensed the storm standing right in the middle of their kitchen, and Riley knew one thing for certain. This storm, they wouldn't see it coming.
The first shift in the Collins household unfolded on a gloomy afternoon. Noah had been in a foul mood all day, fuming because stepmom Avery insisted he finish his chores before playing video games. Riley was carrying a basket of clean towels upstairs when she caught sight of Noah standing right behind Gracie. The little girl was toddling up the steps, one by one, her small hand clutching the banister. In the blink of an eye, Noah leaned forward slightly, preparing to shove Gracie down the stairs like he'd done before. But this time was different. Riley moved like lightning. She dropped the laundry basket, seized the back of Noah's hoodie, and yanked him backward so hard his back slammed against the wall. The impact echoed, startling Gracie into a sharp wail. Noah's mouth hung open, too stunned to process. "Are you crazy?" Riley didn't utter a word. Her icy, piercing stare froze the boy in place. As Gracie burst into tears, Riley scooped her up, holding her close and whispering gentle reassurances. But in that same moment, Margot, hearing the commotion from the kitchen, came storming up the stairs. She pointed a trembling finger at Riley, shrieking, "Avery, what on earth have you done now? Did you hurt Noah? You've lost your mind." Riley spun around, her gaze sharp as a blade. "He was about to push Gracie down the stairs. I stopped him." Her voice was low, steady, and held an unmistakable threat.
That statement, delivered with unflinching defiance, stopped everyone in their tracks. No one in that house was accustomed to an Avery like this. From that day on, Riley began overhauling the entire order of the household, cleaning with military precision, locking the medicine cabinet, clearing away the clutter Margot always left behind, and, most importantly, caring for Gracie the way a real mother should, something the old Avery had never been fully allowed to do. Mark's mother, Ethel, watched with mounting discomfort. She muttered constantly under her breath, "That Avery girl lately, she's different. Not so lazy, not dodging work. Her attitude is just plain strange." That evening, Mark, drunk as usual, staggered home reeking of whiskey. Seeing Riley washing Gracie's bottle at the sink, he bellowed, "Avery, don't you play the goody-goody with me. Who do you think you're fooling?" He grabbed Riley's arm, trying to yank her, but in a split second, Riley pivoted, locking his arm behind his back and forcing him face down onto the hard wooden floor. Mark's face hit the planks with a painful thud. Riley leaned down, her voice a cold whisper in his ear. "I am not someone you can hit." Mark trembled, his face ashen. He looked at his wife as if she were a complete stranger. A strong Avery? Impossible. And for the first time in years within the walls of the Collins home, fear began to stir, but not in Gracie and not in Riley. It flickered to life in the hearts of those who had grown accustomed to inflicting pain.
Only a few days into her stay at the Collins house, Riley began to realize everything Avery had ever told her was merely the tip of a much larger, darker iceberg. Avery's feeble excuses for Mark that he was just hot-headed, Margot was set in her ways, and Ethel just wanted what was best for Gracie were not the truth. The truth was far more sinister. One morning, just after Mark had left for work, Riley heard the ping of a text message on his phone in the living room. She usually wouldn't have bothered, but this time the screen clearly displayed, "You still owe $8K, 3 days or no excuses." It was from an unknown number, followed by a knife emoji. Riley tapped the screen, and a series of previous messages flooded into view. Mark had borrowed money for football bets and kept losing. The debt had ballooned to over $45,000. In a voice recording, Mark's trembling voice pleaded, "I'll pay. Just give me a little more time. My wife gets a small stipend. I can get more from that." Riley froze. Avery had always said Mark was just quick-tempered, but had never let them go without. Yet the refrigerator in this house was nearly empty. Everything made sense now. Mark was hiding a crushing debt. And that was only the beginning. One afternoon, Riley noticed Margot sneaking to open a drawer under the kitchen sink. When she left, she checked it. Inside was a small ledger detailing Margot's credit card payments, all paid using the monthly support funds meant for Avery and Gracie. Riley's grip tightened on the book.
Riley accidentally discovered an old envelope tucked behind a pillow. Inside was a legal document copy, a voluntary surrender of parental rights. The cold, typed words on the page read, "I, Avery Adams, hereby agree to relinquish all custody and parental rights to my daughter, Gracie Collins." The signature line was still blank, but the crumpled corners of the paper showed it had been presented and refused many times. A chill ran down Riley's spine. How long has Ethel been forcing Avery to sign this? She had thought Avery was trapped in a bad marriage, but no! Avery had been living under the weight of debt, financial manipulation, psychological abuse, and the constant threat of losing her child. One wrong step, and Gracie would be torn from her mother's arms forever. Riley knelt down, gently smoothing the wrinkled paper, a painful lump forming in her throat. Avery, you endured all of this alone? In that moment, Riley understood more clearly than ever before. She wasn't just here to escape her own past. She was here to save Avery, to save Gracie, and to expose the ugly truth the Collins family had been hiding all along. She took a deep breath, crumpling the paper in her fist, her resolve hardening like steel.
That same afternoon, while Riley was washing dishes in the kitchen, she heard the unfamiliar rumble of a pickup truck pulling up in the front yard. The front door swung open, and a large man, his neck covered in tattoos, strode inside as if he owned the place. His eyes were sharp and cold. Mark hurried to greet him, his voice low and purposeful. "Clyde, been a while." Riley stood behind the kitchen partition, silently observing. She heard Mark mutter to Clyde, his words barely audible but dripping with intent. "Need you to handle Avery. Get her back in line. She's getting harder to control." Get her back in line. They talked about Avery like she was a broken appliance that needed fixing. Riley's hands clenched into fists. She understood now. Avery wasn't the only target in this house. Now she herself, as Avery, was on their list of problems to be removed. That night, Riley discovered her phone's SIM card had been removed. The casing was intact, but the slot was empty. This was control, a familiar tactic of the Collins household. She tried to open her bedroom window, locked from the outside. Once again, Riley felt the walls closing in. They were cornering her. As she went downstairs to help with dinner, the atmosphere felt palpably different. Mark was overly attentive, Margot's smile was strained, and Ethel stood by the simmering pot of stew with a suspicious, almost giddy air. Gracie had been shooed into the living room, barred from the dinner table. Clyde sat by the back door, his eyes flicking toward Riley as if waiting for a signal. Riley quietly noted the ladle Ethel had just used to stir the pot. The old woman's hand trembled ever so slightly, and then Riley caught it. A strange, faintly bitter odor mixed with the scent of the stew. It was the telltale medicinal tang of crushed sedatives. As Ethel scooped the first helping of stew into a bowl meant for her, Riley pretended to have a coughing fit, stumbled backward, and deliberately tripped against the table leg. The entire pot of stew toppled over, hot gravy splattering everywhere. Mark jumped up, yelling. Margot cursed. Clyde sprang to his feet, poised to grab her. But Riley didn't care about the chaos. In the ensuing confusion, she slipped away to the family den, the room where they always plotted behind Avery's back. From her pocket, she pulled out the tiny voice recorder Avery had once given her to keep a therapy journal at the hospital. Riley knew its true value now. She taped the recorder underneath the heavy oak table, right where all their schemes were hatched. And then, as she stepped back into the kitchen's uproar, Riley knew one thing for certain. The real battle had only just begun.
That night, the wooden house in Bangor fell into a deep, penetrating cold. The clock on the wall ticked each second with excruciating slowness. Riley lay perfectly still in bed, her breathing even, eyes closed as if lost in a deep sleep. But her body was coiled tight as a spring, listening intently to every faint sound from the hallway. 1:56 a.m. A soft creak of floorboards. Then whispers. Mark's voice, low and sharp. "Get ready. She's out cold." Followed by Clyde's voice, a deep, sinister rumble.
"Just give me 5 minutes. Tie her up, gag her, throw her in the truck, done by dawn."
Ethel and Margot stood somewhere behind them, breathing heavily with nervous anticipation, fearing the plan might fail. 2 a.m. The doorknob to Riley's room slowly turned. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across her face. She remained motionless, her head tilted slightly to the side like someone in a genuine, drug-induced sleep. But her body was coiled tight as a spring, listening intently to every faint sound from the hallway. Clyde entered first, carrying rope and a roll of silver duct tape. Mark followed closely behind, clutching a bottle of chloroform. Ethel and Margot hovered just outside the door, holding their breath. Clyde leaned down, his hand reaching out to touch Riley's shoulder. The moment his fingertips brushed her skin, Riley moved. Faster than lightning, she seized Clyde's wrist, twisted it violently. A sickening crack echoed in the silence. Before he could even gasp, she had him in a lock, forcing his face down into the wooden floor with a brutal slam. He let out a pained roar.
"What the hell?" Mark lunged forward in panic, but Riley pivoted, snatched the chloroform bottle from his hand, and swung it hard against the side of his head. He staggered back, dazed, muttering incoherently, unable to reconcile the weak Avery he knew with the force standing before him. Margot screamed. Ethel clutched her chest. The door remained wide open, a gust of cold wind whipping through, billowing the curtains like a warning. Clyde tried to push himself up, but Riley gave him no chance. She pinned him down, twisted his arms behind his back, and used a length of electrical cord from the nearby lamp to bind his wrists tight, trussing him up like a captured animal. Mark, trembling with terror, shrank back against the wall. Riley rose to her full height and strode toward him, her gaze icy. "Try touching me again?" Mark stammered, his voice shaking. Who are you? Avery she's not like this." "Correct. Avery isn't like this." As Mark tried to scramble away, Riley kicked the back of his knee. He buckled with a cry. She grabbed his collar and dragged him to the center of the room as if he were nothing but a sack of trash. With Clyde securely bound, Riley turned her attention to Mark, forcing him face down on the floor and using the remaining cord to lash his arms behind his back. He begged, pleaded, but Riley didn't even spare him a glance. Margot and Ethel stood frozen, speechless. In the darkness of the room, only the sounds of ragged breathing and the tightening of cord filled the air. Riley stood tall, looking down at the two men lying helpless at her feet, bound, defeated, stripped of all their arrogance. Their hunt had failed. Now it was Riley's turn to strike back, and she was only getting started.
With Mark and Clyde bound and helpless on the floor, Riley knew she had only a narrow window before Ethel or Margot could call for help. She ran straight to Mark's study, a cluttered room heavy with the stale smell of old cigarettes. She dragged the small safe out from under the desk. Avery had once whispered through tears that Mark kept their daughter's legal papers there, but Riley wasn't sure. She remembered the 4-digit passcode Avery had murmured in a moment of trust, 0912, their shared birthday. The safe clicked open, but Riley immediately slammed the lid shut as if something dangerous lurked inside. She took a sharp breath and opened it again, this time forcing herself to look. There were no papers, no documents, only a plain black USB drive and stacks of cash bundled with rubber bands, not household money, but money for paying debts or buying silence. Riley plugged the USB drive into Mark's laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying dozens of video files with chillingly simple names. Noah Training 1. Make him strong. Fix your son, Margot. She opened the first video. The scene made her stomach clench. Noah, around 6 years old, stood trembling in the garage wearing only a thin t-shirt as Mark shouted, forcing the boy to balance on one foot. Margot stood nearby, arms crossed, her face a mask of cold disapproval.
"Noah, real men don't cry." Smack. Mark slapped the boy, sending him stumbling. Margot's voice cut in sharply. "He's weak. You have to teach him to be strong. A son like this is a disgrace to me." The second video was even worse. Margot dragged Noah across the living room by his ear for spilling a glass of milk. Ethel watched impassively, as if it were an ordinary parenting lesson. Noah didn't cry. He just folded into himself, as if long accustomed to this. Riley opened a third video, her hand trembling slightly. In it, Mark forced Noah to lift weights far too heavy for a child. When Noah collapsed, gasping for air, Mark nudged him with his foot. "Get up. Men aren't weak," Margot's monotone voice instructed. "If he doesn't listen, hit him harder." Riley hit pause. In that moment, every broken piece of this toxic house fell into place, revealing a single, undeniable truth. Noah wasn't bad. He wasn't a mean-spirited child. He was a product of cruelty, raised by broken rules. He, too, was a victim, just like Avery, just like Gracie. A wave of rage washed over Riley, but beneath it surged an unexpected, aching sympathy for the boy. She closed the video, gripping the USB drive tightly, a piece of evidence more damning than she'd ever imagined. If Avery ever returned to this house, if Mark and Margot were allowed to remain unpunished, then Gracie, and even Noah, would never know a real childhood. Riley made a silent vow to herself. It's time to tear this whole hellhole down.
After securing the USB and leaving Mark and Clyde bound on the floor, Riley knew one wrong move and she'd lose any chance of saving Avery and the children. So she decided to launch a final counterattack, an intricate trap designed to make the Collins family destroy themselves with their own cruelty. She slipped into Gracie's room and retrieved a worn brown teddy bear, a toy the whole household dismissed as worthless. But Riley knew it had a small inner pouch. With a few careful stitches undone, she tucked inside the tiny camera she'd always carried in the psychiatric hospital to record her therapy sessions. Today, it would serve a very different purpose. She positioned the bear atop the wardrobe, aimed perfectly toward the doorway. A flawless vantage point. Then she returned to the room where Mark and Clyde lay helpless, pretending to panic, knocking things over, creating a loud commotion as if a violent struggle were still happening. She screamed, then voice trembling just enough, making sure it carried down the hall.
"Ethel, Margot, help! Mark's hurt bad! Hurry!"
The sound worked exactly as intended, followed by the frantic shuffle of footsteps and Ethel's familiar angry grumbling. The door burst open. The room was pitch black. Riley had turned off the lights earlier. Only a sliver of hallway light cut through the darkness. "What's that foolish girl done now?" Ethel snapped.
"Let me turn on the—" Margot started. "No! Grab her before she gets violent again!" Riley cried, layering her voice with false urgency.
Hearing that, the women's cruel instincts took over. No thought, no verification, just the ingrained belief that weak Avery was causing trouble. They lunged into the darkness, swinging blindly, putting all their force into hitting Riley. Thwack, crash, slap. But in the dark, what they were hitting wasn't Riley at all. It was Mark, bound and utterly defenseless. Mark choked out a strangled cry. "Stop! It's me! It's me!" But Ethel and Margot were too frenzied. They thought Mark was just putting on a voice to escape. They slapped his face hard, punched his shoulders and back. Riley stood motionless in the corner, watching the scene with cold detachment. She knew the camera inside the teddy bear was capturing every blow, every curse, every act that could bring the entire Collins family to court. Finally, when Margot fumbled and hit the light switch, the scene was laid bare. Mark lay crumpled on the floor, face bruised, sobbing breathlessly. Clyde writhed on the ground like a wounded animal, and Ethel and Margot stood frozen, their hands still raised, faces pale with horror. Riley stepped out from the shadows,
her voice unnervingly calm. "I didn't do a thing. You just beat your own son." That truth struck like a knife straight into the pride of the Collins family. And at the same time, Riley now held 3 key pieces of evidence: assault between adults, conspiracy to kidnap and unlawfully confine, and, most damning, the long-term abuse of a child. A single tap to send it all, and the Collins family would crumble. And Riley wouldn't hesitate.
Riley sent all the evidence, the USB video showing Mark assaulting Noah, the footage of Ethel and Margot beating Mark in the dark, and the recorded conversation plotting to take Gracie by any means necessary. Just minutes later, 4 patrol cars screeched to a halt outside the house. Police officers swarmed the yard. Margot, who had run out to see what was happening, was ordered to stop and raise her hands. Her face drained of color as a female officer read out the charges in a clear, sharp voice: child endangerment, conspiracy to unlawfully confine, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Ethel, always so prideful and cold, suddenly became flustered and frantic. As the handcuffs clicked shut, she kept muttering, "This is all a misunderstanding," but no one was listening. Neighbors crowded the sidewalk, witnessing a scene they thought only happened in movies. Clyde tried to intervene, shouting that Riley had made it all up, but he was immediately tackled, cuffed, and charged with attempting to abduct a minor by force. He was dragged away amid the shocked whispers of onlookers who at once believed the Collins family was picture perfect. Meanwhile, Mark was carried out of the house on a medical stretcher. His face was a mess of bruises, but more unsettling was the hollow emptiness in his eyes. When an officer took the USB drive and quickly reviewed its contents, their expression turned grim. One of them said quietly to Riley, "What you've provided, these are very serious charges." Mark was taken straight to the hospital, but his name was already on the report, charged with child abuse and long-term domestic cruelty. Riley stood holding Gracie behind the fence. As the 3 people who had tried to take her away were driven off in police cars, Gracie wrapped her small arms tightly around Riley, an instinctual understanding that the only safe place left was in her arms.
The ambulance carrying Mark drove away. The patrol cars disappeared around the corner. The house fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the hushed murmurs of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. A hospital transport van pulled up to the curb. A medical staff member stepped out, helping a woman down. Avery. She was still dressed in hospital clothes, her face pale, but her eyes were clear and alert, more focused than they had been in years. When she saw Riley standing by the fence, holding Gracie tight, a faint, grateful smile touched her lips. An officer approached, holding a folder of investigation documents. His tone was formal, yet kind. "We've reviewed the treatment records. The information shows Riley has been stable for years and was eligible for reintegration. She should have been released sooner." Hearing this, Riley fell silent for a moment. All those lost years, the cold white walls could no longer hold her back. Avery stepped forward and took Riley's hand, their eyes meeting. A decade of pain and separation seemed to dissolve in that single tight embrace. They stood together on the porch of the wooden house, Gracie clinging to her mother's side, her small face finally at peace. Noah stood at a distance, his eyes still wary, but a faint glimmer of hope flickered in his expression. A neighbor watching them whispered, "Finally, the truth comes out." Riley and Avery held each other, and in that moment, they both felt something they hadn't in a long time, a world free from the shadow of fear.
Several weeks after the emergency hearing, Avery stepped out of the main courthouse with a radiant smile. In her hand was the final ruling. Full legal custody of Gracie was officially hers.
No one could ever again tear that child from her mother's arms. No more violence, no more fear. Meanwhile, Noah, with the weary eyes of a child accustomed to suffering, was placed into the foster care system for temporary protection. But when the social worker asked about potential long-term guardianship, Avery stood up without hesitation. "I'll take him. He needs a safe home." No one objected. After all the evidence of abuse Riley had provided, the entire court understood that Noah, too, was a victim, abandoned in his own family. As for the Collins family, the judgment was swift and absolute. Ethel, Margot, and Mark were permanently banned from contacting Avery, Gracie, Noah, or Riley ever again. Margot and Mark were sentenced to 5 years in prison for their crimes, while Clyde received a 2-year sentence for his role as an accomplice. A dark chapter had closed, and this time no one held the power to reopen it. Riley received her official discharge papers, her psychological records amended after the full extent of the misconduct was uncovered. She moved into a new home with her sister Avery, nestled near the Pine Woods. With hands once accustomed to machinery, Riley opened a small auto repair shop in the town of Bangor. Locals began to know her as the woman with the warm heart. That evening, in the freshly renovated wooden house, clean, bright, and filled with the scent of baking, Avery was setting the table. Gracie ran around hugging her teddy bear. Noah sat beside Riley, carefully arranging the toy tool set she had given him. Warm lamplight washed over the faces of the 4 of them, 2 adults, 2 children, like a gentle seal on a brand new beginning. Avery looked around, her heart full. Riley gave her sister's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, while Noah and Gracie giggled, playfully fighting over the first slice of pie.